In February 1519, 11 ships appeared off the coast of Mexico. On board were about 500 Spanish soldiers, 16 horses, and a few cannons, led by a man named Hernán Cortés. He wasn't following orders, he was acting on ambition. Cortés had been sent to explore, not conquer, but he had no intention of turning back. He landed near the site of modern Veracruz and immediately claimed the land for Spain. The local Totonac people, who had long paid tribute to the powerful Aztec Empire, greeted him cautiously. They brought food and gold, unsure whether the strangers were gods or invaders. Within days, Cortés learned enough to understand how divided the land was. Dozens of smaller tribes hated the Aztecs, who demanded heavy taxes and constant tribute. That division would become his greatest weapon. To ensure his men had no thought of retreat, Cortés ordered his ships burned and dismantled. There would be no going home. They would conquer or die. The Spaniards built a base at Veracruz and began preparing for the march inland. Word spread quickly across Mexico. Pale-skinned men with metal armor and thunderous weapons had come from the sea. To some, they were a sign of hope. To others, an omen of death. In August 1519, Cortés and his men began their journey toward the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. The march was long and brutal. The terrain shifted from coastal jungle to steep mountains and high plains. Supplies ran short. Tropical rain turned roads into rivers of mud. Along the way, the Spaniards fought their first major battles. Near Cholula, they clashed with Aztec-aligned towns, defeating them easily with steel swords, crossbows, and cannon fire. But soon they faced a far stronger enemy, the Tlaxcalans. The Tlaxcalans were fierce warriors who had resisted Aztec control for years. For 2 weeks, they fought the Spaniards in open combat. Spanish armor and horses shocked their opponents, but the Tlaxcalans refused to retreat. Hundreds died on both sides. Eventually, seeing they couldn't win, the Tlaxcalan leaders met with Cortés. Instead of destroying them, he offered peace. That decision changed everything. The Tlaxcalans became his allies, providing thousands of warriors, food, and knowledge of the land. They wanted revenge on the Aztecs and saw the Spaniards as the key to it. As the combined force marched toward the heart of Mexico, rumors spread of Cortés' strange power, his weapons, his horses, and the thunder of his cannons. The Aztecs began to take notice. Cortés' next destination was Cholula, a large and sacred city allied with the Aztecs. It was home to temples, markets, and tens of thousands of people. When the Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies entered, they were welcomed with ceremony. The city's leaders offered food and lodging. But tension hung in the air. Messengers from the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma had visited the city days earlier. They warned the people about the Spaniards and possibly told them to prepare an ambush. Whether there was truly a plot or not is still debated, but Cortés believed his life was in danger. He decided to strike first. At his order, Spanish soldiers blocked the city's exits while the Tlaxcalans surrounded it. Then, in a sudden attack, they opened fire. Cannons roared, soldiers charged, and thousands of unarmed men and women were cut down in the streets. The massacre lasted for hours. When it ended, the city was covered in smoke and blood. Cortés made his point. Any city that resisted would be destroyed. Word of Cholula spread across the region like wildfire. Many smaller towns surrendered immediately after hearing what had happened. To the Spanish, it was a warning meant to prevent more bloodshed. To the people of Mexico, it was a message of terror. After Cholula, Cortés resumed his march toward the Aztec capital. Messengers arrived frequently from Moctezuma, bringing gifts, gold, feathers, and precious stones. Each gift was meant to persuade the Spaniards to turn back. Instead, the gold only confirmed what Cortés already believed, that he had found a land of immense wealth. By November, the Spanish army and their Tlaxcalan allies reached the Valley of Mexico. What they saw stunned them. The city of Tenochtitlan rose from the middle of a vast lake. connected to the shore by long stone causeways. White towers, wide streets, and gleaming temples filled the island. Thousands of canoes moved across the water. It was larger and more organized than any European city they had seen. Cortés and his men were welcomed into the city on November 8, 1519. Moctezuma himself came out to meet them, carried on a litter of gold and feathers, surrounded by nobles. The meeting was formal and quiet. Moctezuma greeted Cortés with respect, offering flowers and gifts. The Spaniard responded with politeness, but his eyes were already fixed on the city's wealth. The Spaniards were led into the heart of Tenochtitlan and given quarters in one of the royal palaces. For the first time, Europeans stood inside the most powerful city in the Americas, a city of over 200,000 people, built on water, governed by an empire. They were guests in name, but in truth, they were invaders standing inside the walls of a civilization that had no idea what was coming. The tension beneath the surface was clear. The Aztecs watched every move, their warriors lining the causeways and rooftops. Cortés knew that if they were discovered or attacked, there would be no escape. But he also knew one thing. Whoever controlled Tenochtitlan controlled Mexico, and he wasn't leaving without it. For the first few days in Tenochtitlan, everything seemed calm. The Spaniards were treated as honored guests. They toured temples, markets, and palaces. The scale of the city amazed them. Fresh water flowed in through aqueducts, streets were swept clean, and the markets held goods from every part of the empire. But Cortés didn't trust the peace. He knew that a single mistake could trap his men inside a city of hundreds of thousands. When word arrived that one of his soldiers had been killed outside the capital, he took no chances. He moved quickly. Cortés and his men seized Moctezuma inside his own palace. The emperor was placed under guard, treated well but clearly a prisoner. Through him, Cortés tried to rule the empire. Moctezuma ordered his nobles to obey the Spaniards and sent messengers to collect gold and tribute. The Aztec people obeyed at first, but resentment grew. The priests saw their temples defiled and their idols mocked. The warriors felt humiliated seeing their emperor under guard. Tensions tightened each day. Meanwhile, Cortés received alarming news. A Spanish expedition had landed on the coast, sent by the governor of Cuba to arrest him for disobedience. If captured, Cortés would lose everything. He decided to act fast. Leaving about 200 men in Tenochtitlan under his lieutenant Pedro de Alvarado, Cortés marched back to the coast with the rest of his force. He defeated the new Spanish expedition and convinced its soldiers to join him. By the time he returned to the capital, Tenochtitlan was in chaos. While Cortés was gone, Alvarado made a fatal mistake. During a religious festival in the main temple, he ordered his men to attack. The reason is still debated. Some say he feared an uprising. Others that greed drove him to seize the nobles' gold. Whatever the cause, the result was disaster. Spanish soldiers surrounded the unarmed celebrants and opened fire. The massacre left hundreds of Aztec nobles and priests dead. When the killing stopped, the city exploded in fury. Bells rang, horns sounded, and warriors filled the streets. The Spanish garrison found itself under siege inside its own quarters. Stones, arrows, and spears rained down from every rooftop. When Cortés returned days later, the situation was out of control. The entire city was against him. He tried to use Moctezuma to calm the crowd. The emperor stepped onto a balcony, calling out for peace. But the people below no longer saw him as their ruler. Stones were thrown. Moctezuma was struck and fatally wounded, either by his own people or the Spaniards themselves. His death ended any hope of negotiation. The Aztecs wanted vengeance. The Spaniards were now trapped in a city built on water, surrounded by causeways easily cut off. They had to escape. On the night of June 30, 1520, Cortés ordered a silent retreat. Rain poured over the city as the Spaniards, and their native allies tried to slip away across the western causeway toward Tlacopan. Each man carried what gold he could carry, too much for many of them. Halfway across, the alarm was raised. Aztec warriors appeared in canoes, attacking from the lake. Drums thundered from the temples, and the night turned into chaos. The narrow causeway became a death trap. Spaniards stumbled under heavy armor and loot. Horses fell into the canals, dragging riders with them. Thousands of Tlaxcalan allies were cut down. The Aztecs used spears and clubs to push men into the water. Cortés fought his way across, wounded but alive. Around him, hundreds of his men were dead or missing. The retreat became known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. When they finally reached dry land, the survivors collapsed. They had lost nearly all their gold, many of their cannons, and more than half their men. But Cortés did not give up. From Tlacopan, the survivors marched to the safety of Tlaxcala, where they were welcomed and cared for. There, Cortés began to rebuild. The Aztecs had won the night, but not the war. For months, Cortés prepared his return. He built a new army of Spaniards and thousands of native allies. Using timber from nearby forests, he constructed 13 small warships called brigantines. They were taken apart, carried over the mountains, and reassembled on the lake. With them, he could challenge Aztec canoes and control the water around the city. In May 1521, the Siege of Tenochtitlan began. The Spanish attacked from 3 causeways while their ships cut off supply routes. The Aztecs fought fiercely, rebuilding barricades at night and launching counterattacks by day. Street by street, canal by canal, the city turned into a battlefield. Food and water ran out. Smallpox, brought unknowingly by the Spanish a year earlier, spread among the population, killing thousands. Corpses filled the canals. Still, the Aztecs refused to surrender. Cortés pushed forward relentlessly. His men tore down bridges and filled canals to cross more easily. The fighting lasted for nearly 3 months. Every day brought more destruction. Temples burned, houses collapsed, the once beautiful city reduced to rubble. By August, the defenders were starving. The last emperor, Cuauhtémoc, led the remaining warriors in desperate resistance. On August 13, 1521, as Spanish troops closed in, Cuauhtémoc tried to escape by canoe across the lake. He was captured by Spanish brigantines. With his capture, the fighting stopped. The city of Tenochtitlan, the greatest city in the Americas, had fallen. The Spaniards walked through the ruins in silence. Smoke rose over the lake. The streets were filled with bodies and rubble. The canals that once carried trade now carried only the dead. Cortés stood in the ruins of the empire he had destroyed. He had come with 500 men and now ruled millions. After months of fighting, there was almost nothing left of Tenochtitlan. By August 1521, most of the city was destroyed. The canals were filled with rubble and corpses. The great temples stood in ruins. The once busy markets were silent. The last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, refused to surrender. He led the final defense with what men he had left. They fought with spears, slings, and courage against cannon fire and crossbows. Each street became a front line. Each day, hundreds more died. The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies closed in from all sides. The brigantines patrolled the lake, cutting off food and escape. The Aztecs were starving. Many were sick from smallpox, a disease they had never seen before. Still, they fought on. On August 13, 1521, Cuauhtémoc attempted to flee across the lake in a canoe. Spanish ships chased and captured him. Brought before Cortés, the young emperor stood proudly and said, "I have done all I could to defend my people. Now take your dagger and kill me." Cortés refused to execute him but took him prisoner. The war was over. The fall of Tenochtitlan ended one of the most powerful empires in the world. It had taken less than 2 years for a few hundred Spaniards, with thousands of native allies, to bring it down. The city that had once stood as the center of the Aztec world now lay in ashes. Its temples burned, its leaders dead or enslaved, and its people scattered. The victory at Tenochtitlan marked the beginning of Spanish rule in Mexico. Cortés immediately took control of the ruins, ordering the city rebuilt as a new capital, Mexico City. Spanish engineers drained parts of the lake and constructed buildings over the old foundations. Churches rose where temples once stood. The surviving Aztecs were forced into labor, clearing rubble and carrying stone. Many were enslaved. Others died from starvation and disease in the months that followed. The city that had once been home to hundreds of thousands now held only a fraction of that number. The Tlaxcalans and other native allies expected rewards for their help. Some received small privileges, but most were quickly pushed aside as Spain tightened control. The Spanish crown claimed all land and tribute, declaring the territory New Spain. Cortés became governor and captain general, but his power didn't last. Within a few years, rival Spanish officials accused him of abuse and corruption. He returned to Spain to defend himself, never regaining the same authority. For the indigenous people of Mexico, life changed completely. The old gods were outlawed, churches replaced temples, and the Spanish language spread through the land. Catholic missionaries began converting the population, sometimes peacefully, sometimes by force. What the Aztecs had built over centuries disappeared almost overnight, replaced by a new world shaped by Spain's empire. The conquest of the Aztec Empire was not just the story of better weapons or brave soldiers. It was a combination of timing, alliances, and disease. Cortés understood that the Aztec Empire ruled through fear and tribute. Many of the smaller tribes hated paying taxes and sending captives for sacrifice. When Cortés arrived, he didn't face one united empire. He faced dozens of nations waiting for a chance to rebel. His greatest victories were not won with Spanish swords, but with native allies who made up most of his army. Technology mattered too. Steel armor, cannons, and horses gave the Spanish a psychological advantage. Aztec warriors had never seen animals like horses or weapons that could fire from a distance. The sound and sight of battle often caused panic. But the greatest factor of all was smallpox. Brought accidentally by a single infected soldier, the disease spread faster than any army. It killed tens of thousands, including many Aztec nobles and generals. By the time Cortés returned for the siege, the empire was already weakened. Moctezuma's hesitation also played a role. Instead of attacking early, he allowed the Spaniards to enter his capital. Cortés turned that hospitality into control. Once inside, the Spanish never left until the city fell. The conquest was not inevitable. It was a series of human decisions, some clever, others desperate. But together, they destroyed one of the most advanced civilizations in the Americas. The fall of the Aztec Empire marked the beginning of a new age, one built on conquest, faith, and cultural collision. Spain's victory opened the door for centuries of colonization across the Americas. Silver, gold, and crops flowed to Europe. In return came Christianity, new languages, and a system that mixed two worlds, often violently. For the indigenous people of Mexico, the cost was immense. Millions died from disease, warfare, and forced labor. Ancient traditions were lost, temples destroyed, and cities renamed. Yet even under the weight of conquest, their culture endured. Aztec art, language, and religion survived in secret, passed down through families and later reborn in new forms. For Spain, the conquest of Mexico became the model for empire. Men like Cortés became heroes and villains, depending on who told the story. His letters to the king turned brutal war into tales of glory and divine purpose. But the reality was far more complex. Greed, ambition, courage, and tragedy all tied together. Modern Mexico was built on both worlds, the indigenous and the Spanish. Its language, faith, and even its capital city trace back to that moment when two civilizations collided on the lake. The conquest of Tenochtitlan ended an empire, but it also created a new one. For the Aztecs, it was the end of their world. For Spain, it was the dawn of an age. And for history, it was one of humanity's greatest turning points, when a few hundred strangers crossed the ocean and forever changed the continent they found.